Welcome to Reroll Multiple Martial Arts, a podcast talking about the intersection of martial arts, society, and culture. I'm Danny.
I'm Elliot.
Elliot, today I was hoping we could talk a little bit about where we left off in our last conversation. And as I recall it, we were trying to unpack or make sense of McGregor's behavior. I wasn't criticizing him, but I was saying that I believed he is a professional fighter that understands the difference between a fighting situation that is part of a sport and the setting itself contained within that context. And he could make a difference from that to a real fight. And his behavior was more appropriate a response to a professional fighter and not a street fight or an emergency fight. And that's where we left off. And I thought that was a really kind of like fruitful topic that we could explore. So today I was hoping we could do that. Just talk a little about the difference between a real fight and our in-class fights in the dojo, maybe our professional fights or our self-defense training.
So in a competition, martial arts competition, whether it's boxing or Jiu Jitsu, we can study our opponent if we're able to, and maybe think about where our opponent trains and maybe see the how those trainers train their students. And for people who are fighting more professional, they're able to see fight tapes and so on and so forth. But in a real fight, on the street, in self-defense, hopefully, we're not in that situation. We can't study the fighter. We're trying to be, as smart as possible, thinking on our feet. And I mean, it's we don't know if the person who's instigating something has a weapon or not. So, are you thinking about those issues, more of a controlled environment versus a uncontrolled environment?
I think all of it, because as I was hearing you, I was thinking about like what would be like the quick response for me. And I would say that one, in a fight, it's not intellectual, like professional fighters are using their body, but I feel that when you reference the archive of discussions about fighting from professional fighters, they always reference how much of an intellectual task it is to fight. So they might even say that if you lose your concentration, you lose the fight. And you're like, how is that possible if you have all this training? So I feel that at the start of this conversation, I would say that a distinction between a real fight and a fight, professional or sparring or even self-defense training has to do with our where we are, our mindset. And a real fight, I think, is not necessarily an intellectual issue. It might be classified as a visceral, instinctual defense, the flight or fight response, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, sparring and stuff, I can be tired and know that my, partner will know their limits and not go all the way. I'm also thinking about, I don't know, as you're talking, I'm just thinking about, all these fights of, for example, Max Holloway versus Qatar, or thinking of, Korean Superboy and Jeremy Stevens, how these fights, they were kind of one-sided, and one person was getting beat up, but they weren't giving up. I mean, they're probably not gonna die, but you see these you see these street fight videos, and I think of what I would do in a person's shoes, how I would react. And I always think, like, there's so many people who train. I don't want to risk, you know, it's smart to not be in a fight in the first place. And body type does not matter. You can see like some super skinny dude and they're fast, they're strong. Look at Max Holloway's body type. You look at him, you're like, dude, that guy looks skinny, but nah, dude. Like, or even someone like, Nathan Diaz. Like, nah, man. Like, we just don't know. And there's so many unpredictable things. I mean, you look at Sammo Hung. He's a heavy set guy, but he's fast. And so I'm, so a real fight versus a professional fight. I'm just thinking, so many things going on. I don't. If I come across an aggressive person, I'm gonna try to stay away. They might have a knife. They might have mace. They might mace me and just beat me up. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think about the term, street fight, and I wanted to see if we could classify them at least into two types. So, one of them, I'll call it like the attack, and the other one, the equal participants. The attack is one sided. You got jumped, and now you're defending yourself. The other one, you're both consenting, at least at a certain point, to the fight. What I mean by those both consenting is that, like, the attack, you're both fighting each other, but you never consented to fight. You never agreed to it. You just got jumped and now you're fighting. The other one, maybe you got upset at me and I got upset at you. I didn't want to fight, but you called me a coward. And then you embarrassed me. And then I say, okay, you want some of this? Let's go. That moment, I consented. I agreed. I might as well be in the ring, even though it's not in the ring. So, as you mentioned, the uncertainty factor goes through the roof. But I was hoping we could talk a little bit about the difference between even the street fight scenario, because I find that, like, yeah, I've always been that way. I've always been the person that really didn't want to fight, even when I thought I could fight. And I want to be clear that, like, it's all in our heads. Everyone thinks they can fight. And if two people are going to fight, one will lose. So your odds are always 50. And those are horrible odds. I mean, come on. Like, I know everyone thinks they're amazing in the gym, but if two people are fighting, one is going to win. And this idea of a draw, yeah, that may work in a professional fight, but in the street, I don't think there is a draw. I think one person gets hurt more than the other, and that's the ratio. But I want to see if you, I want to hear your thoughts on this distinction between the attack, which is a one-sided energy, and the equal participant / consenting to engage in the fight. Does that make sense to you, or, like, do you think there's another way of framing it?
No, absolutely. Yeah, getting jumped or attacked, getting a cheap shot is terrible. Especially you see, as of late, a lot of these elderly, I'm going to say elderly East Asian folks, senior citizens, just getting cheap shot, just getting attacked. Some people dying, and that's a terrible situation. In other situations, the other side, what you're talking about, as well, is two people fighting, which we would usually see on an online setting. Oh, look at these two, street fights. Yeah, oh, they're in the basketball court, or in a driveway. Yeah, and it's interesting seeing. Sometimes you'll see someone who has trained and someone who hasn't. Or, I saw a video of a mugger. Someone, was stealing this woman's purse, and then another guy who was with the woman attacked the attacker, and got him on a Muay Thai clinch and started kneeing him in the head, and I'm like, oh yeah, that guy trains. And in the comments, people are saying, oh, that guy trains, yeah, Muay Thai, yeah. I was like, wow. I mean, so it's interesting, or even you see that this one Fear Factor episode, it's famous clip of Joe Rogan putting that guy in a Thai clinch, because the guy who in Rogan's clinch had a loud mouth and was started um, saying rude things to the other guests and stuff, and it just kind of tensions kind of boiled over. But absolutely, so now that we've established, you know, um, in this street, like two examples of a street fight situation, one, in agreement, one not in agreement, a random attack, where do we go from here?
Well, I wanted to explore just some of the ways that um, that reality can help us in our training. So that I find that, yeah, almost everywhere I've been, there was always an element of overconfidence.
Mm.
So that when I did, if I was 13 and I did Kenjutsu, um, yeah, my classmates, we were little kids, so you can only imagine what that looked like. It was every other weekend someone bragging about like, and then I did a flying kick to that guy's neck, something ridiculous. And that makes sense. You're a kid and you want to just exaggerate. None of that was happening. But as I got older, it was always like that. To the point that eventually I hear grown men saying, and then I did a flying kick. You're like, you didn't do that. Be quiet. Like, I've never seen you do anything like that. But the part that I find frustrating is that I think there's a level of, yeah, overconfidence is the word I just said, but I'm pretty sure it's a better one that speaks to the illusion of what we do. So that, like, if you train every other day and you're doing, like, let's say you're putting in 3 sessions a week, on average 6 hours a week of training, you're in good shape. I remember I had one of my senseis. We would train and it'd be like a Friday night and we're all tired, and he would get more out of us by screaming at us that, like, this is the real fight. This is in the, this is in the alleyway. They're coming at you. You can't let them win. He was. But what were we doing? We're punching the air or kicking the air. Like, we weren't really fighting, but it was like, get all of that conditioning out because you might need it.
Mm.
And I did know people, even in that scenario, that did fight on the weekends. That they like to test themselves out. But even then, I realized those were the ones that were doing the street fight version too, the equal participants.
What was that thing you said where, this is just kind of making fun of, jiu-jitsu practitioners, and but you're like, oh, in a real fight, every punch they get hit in the face, they lose like a belt color,
Yeah, I
belt
remember I
ranking.
heard that. I heard that a lot. I don't know who is attributed credit for that, but it speaks to this format that if you punch a black belt in the face, it becomes a brown belt. If you punch a brown belt in the face, it becomes a purple belt. And I don't know where it stops, but I know that there's this semblance of, like, all our training in jiu-jitsu does not include getting punched. There are a couple models of jiu-jitsu that train with punching simulation, but the closest one that I can think of is a full MMA match.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, you're not actually simulating the street version of getting attacked, because that's going to
Mm-hmm.
frazzle you. In fact, I think that's the part that I find myself a little bit, yeah, like, concerned about, because I remember I've had both situations where, like, I was jumped and where I've agreed. Um, And the one where I agreed is the one that I feel that I think I've told you. I've always felt embarrassed about those. Like they're just I'm glad that there aren't videos of that. And 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 I would even feel embarrassed not because I lost. I think like in some of them I won. I'm pretty sure. I probably had a decent performance. I remember one time like just taking this double leg takedown, which I didn't know that's what it was at the time, and just being able to kind of like sit on this guy's stomach and punch him in the face. The only reason I did that was because he was taller. So every time I got closer, he punched me in the face. So I just ducked, got his hips, took him down. Now, that was a ridiculous moment. But when I got jumped and I was a little kid, teenager, I didn't do anything. Literally nothing, froze. And I remember that moment. It was fear, but it was not fear that I was being hurt by the person. In fact, the person, I was taking the punches and I did get permanent damage eventually. I mean, I registered later, like my jaw's busted from that.
Mm.
Because I let him hit me too many times. I let him, dude, because I was so scared. But I wasn't scared of him. I was scared of the moment because it was three people, and one of them attacked me. The moment scared me, but not the physical altercation. And I think that's the part that a lot of us in our training are unable to understand. Like, I remember training with this one woman and she was Shotokan in LA, and she came to class one day and she said I got jumped, and I defended myself, and we were all super excited about her like performance, like her reaction, because she was really kind of like I defended myself, but I didn't understand that maybe she was also keeping something that I'm just telling you now. Like that moment of getting jumped to me was terrifying. It happened like 30 years ago. And the other times that I got jumped were not as traumatic. Like I got mugged once, and the same thing. Like I wasn't even expecting it. Like literally just like getting punched and I'm just covering, and I was able to kind of pull away and escape, but not before I got hit a bunch of times. But that didn't include fear. It was reactionary. I was just like, I need to escape this, what's happening. But that first moment, I'm telling you a story that happened over 30 plus years ago because it really messed me up. And I think that's something that a lot of us do not train, or I don't even know if we can train that. Because when I've trained in the self-defense mode, man, it feels great. Like you walk out of that seminar going like, come at me. I wish someone comes at me. I just learned this cool disarmament technique. You're like, no, that mindset is, I'm not going to say wrong, but it is dangerous.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, definitely. I mean, there's so many ways of self-defense and attacking. I mean, different practices. Anything can be a weapon, a pen, a cup, or even, so stuff like, say, Jiu Jitsu, someone has, you in a lock or something. Well, we can pinch them, we can, we manipulate digits, like bend their finger back, and that would hurt. But it's not, yeah. And in a gym setting, in a dojo setting, we don't practice those things. There's rules, but in a street fight, obviously, rules are out the window. And, I've sparred with, say in Muay Thai, certain beginners, and, I would try to do something to get a reaction, but I'm not getting a reaction out of a beginner because someone who has trained a little bit longer would react differently. I mean, we've talked about this, when you're in jiu-jitsu, the white belts move differently. And so I'm like, okay, same thing in every practice. And so, it's not like, we can, it's not like we can instill like certain rhythms, to trick our opponent in a real fight. I mean, it's all on our feet and stuff. But it's kind of cool seeing, certain street fights, those videos where someone has had, boxing experience. So they're using the jab to keep distance, and I think that's a really great move to keep distance. But also, with jiu-jitsu, knowing how to neutralize a situation. I mean, yeah, so with a striker, all I know is to punch, elbow, kick a person. But with jiu-jitsu, you can neutralize the situation, um, basically almost protect the quote unquote bad guy from hurting and getting hurt from other people, with mob mentality and stuff like that. And so, a famous one would be, Matt Serra, I think in Vegas or something, who, you know, neutralized it like an unruly drunk guy, and basically sat on his stomach and like controlled his hands until, that guy, I think, got arrested. And so I think, there's a lot of, I think, yeah, every situation's different. And, I don't know. It's like studying street fight videos. It's like, would studying street fight videos better prepare you for a street fight, D? Do you think that would help?
No, they don't, because most of the street fight videos that at least I've catch are the ones that's number two, like equal participants, a consensual combat. And surprisingly, they actually do a little bit of what most of our training is not set up to do. So in the like consensual combat agreement, some of them follow fighting rules, so that I may not know Muay Thai or boxing, but I pick up my fist and I put them in front of my head, of my face, and then what I do is that, like, I start swinging. The other person knows what they're doing. You're like, oh, this, I've done something similar. That's a really bad jab, a haymaker. How awful! And you're just like peppering at them, and you hurt them. Okay, but what happens if they don't do that? What happens if they rush at you like a crazy person and try and do this like octopus kind of like bear hug? And you're like, oh, in Muay Thai we never do that. We kind of do the clinch, but the guy doesn't like try and hug me and then wrap his legs around me and then try and bite my neck. What I'm trying to say is that, like, I think most of the fighting that I've seen in the street, on video, and back in the day when I was in my 20s and clubbing, almost every weekend there was a fight in the parking lot. It was ridiculous, and back then it was fun to stand there and watch. And now I just think, like, no, that's not even reasonable. Like, what kind of person wants to see this? And I was like, well, I pay money to see it, so obviously I'm one of them.
I remember in, like, middle school, high school, whenever there was a fight, you see everybody running. You create a big circle around the 2+ people, and that was those were some of the highlights. I don't know. I don't like to admit that, but yeah, like
No,
you said,
it was the highlight of, I mean, kind of switching back into school, of the boredom of institutionalized learning. I mean, we're contained, how many hours, thousands of hours of our lives in these like places that have control over our bodies. So anytime something different happened, it definitely made it interesting. But I think that the point that I'm trying to put forward is, like, what's the point of knowing the difference? And I think the point of knowing the difference is for you to be realistic with yourself. There's two things that I want to highlight. One was that, like, I've seen people, quote unquote, test themselves in street fights. And I think that one is not fair, because that test, you know what it is? It's number two. It's agreeing to an outside sparring session. And that's not cool, because the other person doesn't know, just like you said, the other person doesn't get a chance to see your tape. So I had a buddy, he was huge, so he didn't need to do this, but he would like to just pick fights. And he was a brown belt in karate, and he would just hurt people. I mean, in ways that are embarrassing. Like, I hope he did brag about it, but I know that I felt embarrassed. Like, if we told our sensei he was doing that, he probably would have gotten kicked out. You know, because he was picking fights knowing that he could hurt people.
Did he go to the same dojo you went to?
Yeah, yeah, and he was good. I would spar with him, and he was bigger than me, so like I was learning how to just not get as much damage from him. But I hardly ever learned anything other than I think that how not to get in the way of like 180 pound 5'10", 5'11" monster. He was huge and strong, but his fights were not the ones I'm saying. Like
Mm-hmm.
he never got jumped. No one he was never saying, I was going to my car and this dude just hit me with a bat in my back
Mm.
and started just like going wailing at me. Cause that's the one that I'm saying, like, that's the one that terrifies us. I was not talking, I was having a talk with someone about, like these moments of reminiscing. And I think I've had something with you too about people talk a lot about, oh, I remember I got into this one fight and I did this and I did that other. Those are great, like bragging sessions. Even when you lose, you're like, oh, I got my tooth knocked out, but man, that was a great fight. But the ones where you say things that are terrifying, like someone broke into my house in the middle of the night, this is what happened. Just recounting that terrifies you because you relive it. And it's not exhilarating. It's not like, oh, and that was the best moment of my karate. No, it's like you're going, I wish that hadn't happened. And that's what I mean about like, what can we learn from street fights? I don't know. I know that there's like, I have a collection of moments that I learned a lot about myself. I had, like told you, like the last time, which probably about like 8 years ago, someone tried to mug me, take my phone. That one was managed as I had been in training. I didn't fight him. I just created distance and managed space. I was watching this one video about this one woman in one of the other martial arts of Jiu Jitsu, and she was recounting her. Someone may or may not have had bad intentions, but she was able to call the moment and tell the person to stop and to stay away, and she protected her space.
Mm-hmm.
And she was recounting how empowering that was. And again, for all I know, that person was just going to ask for spare change. But the point isn't that. It's the point that she was able to control her space and get a result. The person backed away. And, and then, I've had moments where like much bigger people, I've done something similar. Like, I need you to step away, and then they start talking smack, but I'm already walking away. So I'm like, what's that all about? It's about me feeling that like, hey, I'm alarmed right now and I am not embarrassed. And definitely, I may be a little bit scared, but I'm not embarrassed to let you know that I'm uncomfortable. But I'm not going to say, hey, you're scaring me. Instead, I go, hey, you need to back away. I was with my daughter and this guy was like asking for change and he kept on following us. And I was like, dude, I need you to walk away. And then he starts mumbling and he tried to come back. And at that point, I was like, okay, this guy is going to get hurt. One of us is going to get hurt. Maybe I was going to get hurt, but that moment was enough for him to go, oh, this guy doesn't like what's happening. And I'm going to go pick on someone else, And again, I don't even know if it was malintention. For all I know, he was not okay. And he just wanted some spare change. But his behavior was alarming. His behavior was the type of thing that like was too close to what I would call a potential attack.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are those moments that we train for. And they're very different than fighting. I think the fighting comes later. I read this one account from one of the senseis that I respected, Ray Dalkey. And I'm probably messing up his story because I read it a long time ago. And he talked about being at home and having someone break in and how he fought and how scary it was. Just how scary, but he was able to defend himself and, like incapacitate the person. And that wasn't jiu-jitsu. It wasn't as gentle. It was a devastating, bloody moment. And I always liked his accounts because when he was older and still in great fighting shape, he would say things that like his technique toward fighting people was leaving before the fight started.
Hmm.
Just knowing he's like, that's how I fight him. I just leave before it starts.
Well, with that said, this has been the Reroll Multiple Martial Arts podcast, where we explore the intersection of martial arts, society, and culture. Until next time.
Peace.